Welcome back to Your Strategist is In. I'm Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝘁. Before we begin, I want to invite you to arrive where you are. If you're listening while moving, driving, or multitasking, see if you can give this a little more of your attention. This episode really asks for presence more than productivity. This is the January episode in our three-part arc. In November, we focused on noticing what still counts when the ground starts to shift. In December, we focused on choosing what you could realistically carry forward and what you had to set down. When I first named January, I used the word reimagining. And as the arc unfolded, I realized that language wasn't quite right. Reimagining can still sound like starting over or reinventing yourself to meet a moment. What January is actually asking for is something quieter, something harder: commitment. Deciding what you're willing to build, given what you know now, given the systems you're inside, given the energy you actually have. So, this episode is not about a fresh start, it's about building forward without a frenzy. So, I'm going to pause here for a moment and let that land. All right, let's begin. Now, before we go anywhere, let's slow this down. I really want to invite you to, throughout this episode, to slow down, just take breaths. Let's not rush. January already can feel overwhelming, frenzied, all of the things that we've committed for New Year's resolution, goals, tasks, bingo boards, you name it. But for this episode, let's just take it slow. So if you're listening to this in January, you didn't arrive here by accident. You passed through November, you stayed with December, you noticed what still counts, you chose what you could carry. That matters. If you're listening while tired or bracing yourself for the new year, or maybe you're unsure of how much energy you actually have, believe me, you're not behind. You're actually paying attention. So let's take another breath. Drop your shoulders, and let's let January noise stay outside the room for a moment. Now, the calendar year has changed, but the systems did not. You're not starting from January, you're standing on ground that has already shifted. This episode is not about rushing forward from that. It's about deciding what you can build from here. January tells a familiar story. New year, new momentum, new urgency, dressed up as intention, as if clarity requires speed, as if stillness means stagnation. But winter doesn't work like that. Nothing above ground looks busy right now, and yet essential work is happening. January's myth is that motivation equals progress. January's truth is that foundation forms quietly. If you feel less frantic than past Januaries, that's not a problem to solve. It may be discernment finally catching up to you. This is not a reset episode, it's a consent episode. Now, I want to name something briefly because you may hear it in my voice. I'm recording this while recovering from a winter cold after traveling So I spent some time in Senegal over the holidays. It was expansive and grounding and joyful. And coming home, I felt the contrast, how much my body needed time to land, how much integration matters before movement. And that experience sharpened me a bit more. In fact, the way I'm looking at January now, and even while why I decided to sort of reframe and rename this episode, is January doesn't ask us to accelerate. It asks us to build from where we actually are. Tired bodies, full hearts, changing perspectives. That's not a delay. That is a starting point. Now, November asks you to notice what still counts when the scorecard stopped making sense. December asks you to choose what you could realistically carry forward and what you had to set down. January asks something harder, not what you want, not what you hope, but what you're actually willing to commit to build, knowing the cost. After the leaves fall, after the load is sorted, what remains buildable? If everything else fades, hold on to this. Building does not require certainty, it requires honesty. There's a distinction many of us were never taught. Proving is consumptive, building is cumulative. Proving asks, can you see me now? What about me? Look at me. Do you see me? Can you acknowledge me? Building asks, will this hold? It's actually, more introspective because you're not relying on external, you're relying on your internal. So we do know that academia rewards motivation, meetings, metrics, visibility, and output. But motion and construction are not the same thing. If you're constantly moving and nothing feels sturdy, that's information. You may be expending energy to maintain legitimacy, not creating something that's sustainable. Notice what happens when you hear that, right? Legitimacy, sustainability. Well, some might argue or suggest that they're not mutually exclusive. And in some regards, they're not mutually exclusive. However, you really want to be mindful of what is guiding you. What are you reaching for? Is it the external validation or the internal drive of what's going to really help you move yourself forward? So, again, it's all about taking time to reflect. So now that I've said that, and as you hear it, what comes up? Is there some relief? Maybe some resistance? Maybe some grief? Maybe some recognition? Frankly, all of that is fair. And maybe you have a couple of other things that come up for you. This is not mutually exclusive. It's really about exploration. So let's return to the people we met in early November and then stayed with through December, not to fix their stories, to see what commitment looks like after discernment. So remember Dr. Patel? Dr. Patel is still running the community engaged program her students rely on. Leadership is still asking for quantifiable ROI. Ugh, right. Okay. Yeah, I get it. I was an administrator before, so I understand, the motivation for this, but I also know that there can be a balance, right? So, For Dr. Patel, December clarified something for her. Not all of that pressure belonged to her. So in January, she made a contained decision. She chose one part of her work she was willing to translate into Matrix, not to justify the whole program, but to shield it. Frankly, I think this is brilliant. And hopefully, this is something that you may be able to take with you, right? Because it conserves energy and you're not trying to prove every single piece of it. Whatever your projects are, whatever your department are, really just, get down to what matters most and don't overdo it. We're going to revisit that in another story. So she stopped trying to make her entire program and purpose legible to a system that keeps changing its language. Frankly, you'll never be able to do that because again, the language keeps changing. And remember with her, the program was already set and she was wanting to keep it and justify it. So you have to be able to determine what pieces of the program really matter to the institution, and that will help really, explain the utility of it. So now, if this sounds familiar, you're not imagining it. Living inside a shifting criteria definitely takes a toll. But if you know where you're going with what you're doing, you will be able to navigate those areas. Remember, roots don't persuade the soil, they anchor where they can survive. Now, Alex, he's still navigating the AI assisted advising tool for student affairs. The tool didn't disappear and the tension didn't either. But December changed how Alex understood excellence. In January, Alex stopped trying to retrofit human values into system designs for efficiency. Instead, they built team practices around what technology cannot replace. This is important because as we continue to think about AI and the discourse around it and how institutions are really trying to integrate it, and where you can find value, a lot of the conversation that's being missed in this noise is the human factor. There's some things that technology cannot replace when it comes to human factor. Frankly, some of the information that we've received around student satisfaction has to do with, some of these AI tools are great, but I really want to talk to somebody when I have a problem, and I want that to be a person, right? So how you can articulate that and show the utility of both will really help. And I think Alex is doing a good job of it. He named the limits out loud and they protected the time for work that really, isn't scalable in terms of what AI can do and what humans can do. And then they stop apologizing for choosing depth over speed. Now, in this decision-making process, Alex is going to have to really stand true and be able to demonstrate with data why this is a good way to go. So it's not resistance. This is construction and really moving in the direction of what's going to help him, his department, and the students. Now, Maria, remember, is an associate dean still holding a college through instability. Budgets are tight, as always, maybe even more so now. Expectations are loud, and December reveals something quietly radical. Some of the emotional weight she was carrying was never hers. So in January, Maria took on less. She clarified what decisions were actually hers to absorb, stopped buffering every shock before it reached others. She allowed disappointment to exist without immediately managing it. And then containment became her form of leadership. This isn't always easy because we're often tasked with do more with less, right? So as you're doing more with less, you're going to get all of these decisions. You're going to have to, navigate the problems, if it were. And it's not always easy to put up good boundaries around this and advocate for yourself, your department, your staff, your faculty, etc. But if you're able to really sit back and say, this is what's mine and this is what's not mine, it can be helpful. So for Maria, winter growth looked like restraint. Now, Jordan. Jordan is still teaching brilliantly. Students are still thriving, and the criteria are still shifting. December asked Jordan a hard question. What am I trying to prove and to whom? January didn't bring certainty, but it brought a line. Jordan stopped overproducing in anticipation of invisible evaluations and promises. They chose one area of teaching to deepen instead of excelling everywhere at once. They began building portable sustainability that does not depend on annual renewal promises. You may remember a story that I related at a particular institution where, someone in leadership said, hire more adjuncts, or hire more term, year to year, and sort of essentially dangle in front of them that they will be renewed next year, or that if they're adjuncts, they might be able to get, a full-time or quarter-time appointment. And I was frankly stunned by that. I was like, well, why would we dangle that if it's not a possibility? But it was a motivator. And I was surprised to learn that this is a tactic that is used. And I didn't really feel comfortable with that. So I was very careful about how I engaged my adjunct faculty or my, 1 year contract individuals. Like I didn't promise them stuff that I knew I couldn't fulfill. But in Jordan's case, I think he came to the realization that, you know what, whether I am renewed here or not, I'm still going to do the things that are going to be helpful. And sometimes what I would refer to my faculty or trainees or, others is transferable skill sets, right? So while Jordan is still teaching on an annual contract and the criteria are still shifting, and things did not stabilize in January, he decided that his energy was better spent anticipating what came next in terms of actual things, right? So for years, he lived inside of this kind of low grade vigilance, trying to read between lines, trying to guess which version of excellence will matter this time. And, not because he wasn't capable of doing what he was doing, because obviously they kept hiring him, but because the rules kept changing and moving. So this kind of uncertainty does something quiet to a person. It trains you to over prepare, over deliver, to keep proving like just in case, right? Just in case they offer me a full-time position, or just in case I might be up for this or that. And so while we want to be mindful of what comes next, we want to be mindful of managing our own energy and being very strategic. You all know that I'm all about strategy, right? So December asked Jordan a hard question. What am I trying to prove and to whom? January didn't bring the answer, but it did bring a boundary. He stopped trying to be excellent in every possible way at once and chose one area of teaching to deepen, one place where his energy could actually accumulate. And that choice came with risk and relief. Because overproducing had never created security, it only created exhaustion. What Jordan is now building is not certainty, it's probability, but skills, relationships, and confidence do not depend on an annual decision letter. Stability that can travel even if the institution doesn't. Now, if you recognize yourself here, pause. This kind of vigilance is not a personal flaw. It's a rational response to unstable conditions. And whether you are year to year, whether you are facing, tenure, whether you're getting ready to go up for rank, whether your position is vulnerable because of grants, remember, nothing is always guaranteed, but you do have skills, relationship, and confidence based on your work. And that doesn't matter whether you have a decision letter, a promotion letter, none of that. What matters is what you have, and you can take it with you anywhere you go. So, roots don't always grow down. Sometimes they spread sideways, looking for ground that will hold. That's still building. It's not giving up. It's refusing to keep auditioning. And how many of us have really what I would call audition exhaustion? It's like every day you're showing up trying to prove yourself. And frankly, I don't know. It's a lot. And there comes a time where you can be able to rely on what you've done and not have to keep auditioning. It's not all, sometimes it's easier said than done. But hopefully, part of this episode, this arc, what I've been providing with you all over the years will start to help you build that confidence and recognize what you have already. So let's take a breath here and notice which story or parts of these stories stayed with you. Now, just breathe in with that and let your shoulders drop. Now, again, what connects these stories isn't necessarily confidence, even though I just spent a lot of time kind of underlying that. It's consent. They noticed, they chose, and then they committed to building anyway. They noticed, they chose, and then they committed to building anyway. November was about shedding. December was about choosing. January is about roots. Roots grow in the dark. They prepare for seasons that haven't arrived yet. If your work feels invisible right now, that doesn't mean it's insignificant. It means you're finally building something that doesn't really require constant explanation. And frankly, you've been doing that all along, right? So I want to name this personally. What I'm building next is not louder, it's more contained. Work that can exist without institutional permission, work that doesn't require urgency to feel legitimate, work that allows rest alongside of rigor. To do that, I'm protecting boundaries around time and attention. I'm no longer serving the metrics of constant visibility. Choosing this means I'm no longer available for certain kinds of urgency. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for me because I too have really been, trained and primed to let all of these things externally move my timeline and my attention. And I'm tired of that. So I've incorporated a few skills and, things that I've added to my toolbox that helps me really understand and be mindful, intentional about my boundaries. Again, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I think that's what growth is about. So the discomfort isn't cheaper. It's just a different thing to think about, right? And frankly, it is better than depletion. So this work is slower work, but it's also truer. So before I ask the final question, I want to name the shape of what we've been circling. This isn't a goals list. It's a set of commitments. One thing you're building, one boundary you're protecting, one metrics that you're no longer serving, and one practice that makes building sustainable. If you want a place to work with this more slowly, I've created a one-page companion called A Small Blueprint, and it's linked in the show notes. Use it now, later, or not at all. You don't need to reinvent yourself this year. You need a direction you can live inside. You don't need to answer this quickly. And frankly, how about don't answer it just yet? Just notice what comes up. All right. So, what feels buildable now? And what are you no longer willing to sacrifice to build it? Winter will hold the answer, and we'll keep building from here. I'm Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝘁, your academic career advancement coach, and here's to your success. And I'd love to know what you're building next.